Imagine waking up one day with the strange sensation that something inside you is dissolving. Not breaking, not exploding, just slipping away quietly. The habits you once clung to no longer comfort you. The reactions that defined you feel delayed, weaker, unfamiliar. Even your thoughts sound different, as if spoken by someone who knows your voice but not your history. At first, you assume something is wrong. Healing, after all, is supposed to make you feel better, lighter, more whole. So why does it feel like loss? Why does growth feel like grief? Why does becoming healthier feel eerily similar to becoming no one? You look around and realize the world has not changed, but your relationship to it has. Old triggers no longer ignite the same fire. Familiar chaos no longer feels like home. And instead of relief, what rises is a quiet panic. If I'm not this pain, if I'm not these patterns, then who am I? This is the paradox no one warns you about. You were taught that healing is additive, that you become more confident, more stable, more complete. But what if healing is subtractive? What if it takes away the very things that once made you feel real? For years, your identity may have been built around survival, around coping, around managing wounds you didn't choose but learned to live inside. Anxiety gave you vigilance, trauma gave you sharp intuition, people-pleasing gave you belonging, even suffering gave you meaning. It told you who you were in a world that never asked. And now, slowly, those structures begin to crumble. You don't wake up one day healed, you wake up disoriented. Moments arise where you should react but don't, where you should feel compelled but feel empty instead, where the familiar internal noise goes quiet and instead of peace, there's an unsettling silence, the kind that feels less like calm and more like standing at the edge of something vast and undefined. Is this freedom or erasure? There's a reason this stage feels so terrifying. When pain leaves, it doesn't just take suffering with it. It takes the story you've been telling yourself about who you are. It takes the inner narrator that explained your choices, justified your fears, and made sense of your limitations. Without that voice, you're left face to face with raw existence. And raw existence has no script. You begin to notice something even more disturbing. Part of you misses the pain, misses the old patterns, misses the intensity of being broken. Not because it was good, but because it was familiar, predictable, safe in its own way. What does it say about you if healing feels like abandonment, if peace feels boring, if stability feels like death? You might start sabotaging without realizing it. Returning to old thoughts, old relationships, old self-concepts, anything to feel solid again, because even suffering is preferable to the terror of the unknown. This is where many people turn back. They say healing didn't work, that self-awareness made things worse, that digging deeper only created confusion. But what if the confusion isn't failure? What if it's the threshold? Consider this. Every identity you've ever had was shaped by what you needed to survive. Your defenses became your personality. Your wounds became your values. Your coping mechanisms became your character traits. Over time, you stopped seeing them as strategies and started seeing them as you. So when healing begins to dissolve them, of course it feels like losing yourself, because in a way you are. But here's the question that changes everything, one that almost no one asks because it's too destabilizing. What if the self you're losing was never you to begin with? What if it was a construction, a response, a necessary illusion formed in pain? And if that's true, then who are you without it? This is the moment where healing stops being comforting and starts being existential, where growth stops being motivational and becomes philosophical, where you realize the real cost of transformation is not effort, but identity. You stand at a crossroads most people never consciously reach. One path leads back to familiarity, to old suffering, to a self you know how to be. The other leads forward into something undefined, uncomfortable, and strangely quiet, a self not yet formed, a life not yet narrated. And the fear you feel now, the fear of emptiness, of disorientation, of losing yourself, is not a sign that something is wrong. It may be the first sign that something profoundly true is about to emerge. But to understand why healing feels this way, why it threatens the core of who you think you are, you have to look beneath symptoms and stories, beneath habits and trauma, into the deeper psychological and philosophical forces that shaped you long before you had a choice. That's where the real problem begins. What you are experiencing is not a personal failure. It is not weakness, and it is not proof that healing is dangerous. It is the collision between identity and truth. To understand why healing feels like losing yourself, you have to look at how the self is formed in the first place, not as something discovered, but as something constructed. From a psychological standpoint, the self is adaptive. Long before it is authentic, it is functional. As a child, you didn't ask, "Who am I really?" You asked, "What do I need to be to survive here?" The answer shaped everything that followed. If love was conditional, you learned to perform. If safety was unpredictable, you learned to stay alert. If emotions were punished, you learned to suppress. If chaos was normal, you learned to confuse intensity with intimacy. These strategies worked. They kept you connected. They kept you alive, emotionally, socially, sometimes physically. Over time, they fused into a coherent identity, not because they were true, but because they were reliable. This is the hidden problem. The identity most people identify with is not a self, it is a survival system. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He argued that much of what we call personality is actually a mask, what he named the persona, a social adaptation designed to meet expectations and avoid rejection. The tragedy, Jung warned, is that most people never take the mask off. They forget it's a mask. They believe it is them. But healing threatens the mask. When old defenses soften, when compulsive patterns loosen, when trauma responses calm, the persona loses its purpose. And when something loses its purpose, it begins to dissolve. This is why healing doesn't feel like addition. It feels like erosion. Yet psychology alone doesn't fully explain the terror of this moment. Philosophy reveals what's really at stake. Jean-Paul Sartre believed that humans are condemned to be free, not liberated by freedom, burdened by it. Why? Because freedom strips away excuses. It removes the comforting idea that you are a certain way. When the old identity collapses, you are no longer defined by trauma, conditioning, or circumstance. You are forced to confront a far more frightening reality. You must choose who you become. And choice without identity feels like standing on air. This is where anxiety enters, not as a disorder, but as a signal that the old framework no longer holds and the new one has not yet formed. The mind, desperate for certainty, reacts as if something essential is being threatened, because from its perspective, something is being threatened: predictability. Arthur Schopenhauer saw this struggle as central to human suffering. He believed that humans cling to desire, habit, and identity, not because they bring happiness, but because they provide continuity. To lose them is to face emptiness, and emptiness feels intolerable to a mind trained to always want, always define, always grasp. Modern society makes this even worse. We live in a culture obsessed with self-definition, labels, diagnoses, archetypes, narratives. You are encouraged to find yourself, but only within predefined categories. The moment you begin to outgrow those categories, you feel untethered, almost illegitimate, as if you're breaking an unspoken rule. Aldous Huxley warned that societies don't control people through force alone, but through identity reinforcement. If people are kept busy maintaining who they think they are, they won't question the structures that shaped them. Healing disrupts this entire system. A healed person is harder to predict, harder to manipulate, harder to categorize. That's why the process feels lonely. There's also a neurological layer to this loss. The brain forms strong pathways around repeated emotional states. If stress, hypervigilance, or self-criticism dominated your inner world for years, those states became familiar, even comforting. When healing reduces them, the brain experiences withdrawal, not from pain itself, but from the identity associated with it. This is why calm can feel wrong, why peace feels dull, why stability feels like emptiness. Your nervous system is adjusting to a reality